Hi there, my name is Phillip Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. And today on the podcast, I'm delighted to share a conversation that I had live at ProcureCon Indirect West in mid-March, actually in Las Vegas, with Darshan Deshmukh. Now, Darshan is the president of ProcureAbility, a leading provider of procurement services, offering advisory, managed services, digital staffing, and recruiting solutions. It will not surprise you to hear that a lot of the conversations that we heard at ProcureCon were around the topic of AI. So Darshan and I took that as our cue to dig deeper into the topic, but more specifically to the impact on the procurement operating model and the reasons why we should look at AI as supplemental to most procurement roles rather than as a replacement. Now, I started the conversation by asking Darshan if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
So like many procurement professionals, actually procurement found me. Mm-hmm. I was an engineer, undergrad, joined a manufacturing firm in engineering and design, and then started working with contract manufacturers on one of the supply demand planning projects.
Yeah.
That's how I got introduced to like extended supply chain, got introduced to the commercial side of procurement at that point and fell in love with it. That's how I got introduced to procurement.
Yeah.
And then over the period of time, got introduced to services procurement. Then it became a lot more complex, a lot more interesting. This was all IBM. So IBM gave me an opportunity to participate in manufacturing, services procurement, but then also got chance to work in global organizations. So I spent a year in Latin America, a year in Eastern Europe, 4 years in Asia, India, and China. So it was a lot of fun kind of building our capabilities on the procurement side. And what kept me in procurement was really all the last 20 years, I worked internally and external roles, practitioner and consulting. It was common thread is procurement was always underinvested.
Yeah.
So any change, incremental change, whether it's efficiency, effectiveness, transformation, drove a pretty big impact to the bottom line, the organizational effectiveness, and that was exciting. And then that's what kept me in procurement.
It's funny you talked about having the opportunity to travel around the world and be in different locations. That was one of the things that kept me in procurement was, being able to marry the interest of different cultures and working in different cultures with something that, and when you start in the direct materials side as well, I think it's really interesting because you can kind of see what you're working on. You know, I was in automotive, we were just talking before we went live. You could kind of see what you worked on driving around, and there was some, it's very rewarding to see that. Yeah. Now, we're recording this actually at ProcureCon Indirect West here in Las Vegas. And so I wonder, we're on day 2 of the event. What are some of the most compelling things that you've heard so far?
So this has been a fantastic event. It's great to see like industry leaders, practitioners, and also service providers, technology providers all under one roof. And if I had to kind of summarize maybe 2 or 3 big things that I'm seeing as trends. The first one is the technology and AI/ML integration in procurement delivery. Yeah. I think till last couple of years, it was always one of the tracks within these conferences where you will have technology track and you will have everything else, category management, SRM, and flavor of the year, basically. Versus I think this year, like that whole integrated delivery, like it's just part and parcel of procurement delivery. That has been front and center at the conference, so that's one. A lot of questions around how do I stay relevant within this changing dynamic and how technology plays in what I do day in, day out. I think that's kind of part of the conversations in that space. The second one that is interesting is sustainability is no longer just a pet project, it's just part and parcel of supply chain delivery. It's supply chain officers, CEOs, that's on the agenda. And how do you make that as part of delivery? I think it's very obvious. It's not a greenwashing exercise. It's more of that integrated.
And it's becoming more, we'd always look at that in you'd see that in Europe, but not necessarily
Not
in the US. And you're now starting to see it's being embraced, not just embraced, but it's a requirement for a lot of what's been done now in the US as well.
And it's no longer just somebody thinks it's important.
Yeah.
It's everybody knows that it's important. So I think that's another.
It's kind of got the top down.
Top down.
No, it's interesting what you said about relevance as well, and I think it's a good thing when procurement leaders are questioning their relevance, because then it drives that. Okay, what do I need to be doing differently, as opposed to the just being comfortable and being happy with the status quo, which I think we could probably, if we look back at procurement in years past, we may have been a little bit too comfortable in the status quo. So I like the fact that we're now starting to question relevance and purpose, because that reshapes how we think about what procurement is in the future.
And I think the third thing, I was thinking about as we're talking, relevance part. I've done these for the last 15 years, these types of conferences, and for the first 10 years, I think half of the conference will be focused on how does procurement get seat at the table.
Yeah.
There's not one session that is focused on that, because no longer cost savings is the conversation. It's all about value delivery.
Yeah.
Are you the true partner to the business? So if I remember, like 15 years ago, when in our services firm, we did a tactical to strategic as a procurement operating model. That's now table stakes. Like everybody's basically focused on that as like that's how we operate. Yeah. And nobody talks about, how am I going to increase the savings? That's not the conversation. So that was another kind of interesting fact. Like not even one session was focused on that.
Yeah, and I see that as well. That savings is now just one part of a bigger picture, and I see maybe risk. So this is where it's a little bit. Well, I don't want to say challenging, but I'm not quite sure kind of where things are heading in terms of. I look at risk as being such a big part of. It's always been a big part of it, but it's growing in importance. And savings is a part of risk because it's kind of protecting the bottom line. But are we then forgetting about the innovation side and the driving revenue side? So I think it's important, while we continue to focus on risk, that we don't lose sight of how can we be a revenue generating function as opposed to something that's more kind of protecting what you've already got, because that's where the investment comes, is parts of the business that are growing the revenue.
Yep. And I feel some of it is the efficiency and effectiveness part of the equation for procurement that's driving whether it's identifying the savings, capturing the savings, the compliance to the strategies, all of that is kind of captured in that. The risk captures that, the little bit of that downstream effect of are you managing the supply chain disruptions in the most effective way. But there are categories where it goes back to, are you enabling the revenue to make yourself, and that's again relevance part, right? Are you relevant to the business, or are you just a back office function, right? And that's not a conversation anymore.
So let's talk about that first one you mentioned, which was around AI. And you see that wherever events you're going to now. And it is interesting you talk about, it's not the technology on its own, it's how you're integrating the technology into the delivery model. But do you think that functional teams feel the same about AI as what procurement does, I think, in the context of using it to buy stuff?
So we as a services firm work with hundreds of clients, so we get a chance to talk to not only procurement but also the stakeholders, because we work with the stakeholders day in, day out, and various industries. And it's really all of the functional teams have similar conversations about AI like the procurement teams do. And it's a spectrum. So if you start like left to right, I would say there are groups that are focused on, how is this going to change? I'm panicking about it. And I'm resisting it, to all the way up to like the AI renaissance, right? Like everything is about AI, and you have somewhere in between like the whole symbiotic existence, right, between human and AI. I would say it's 20 to 30% is in that left-hand side of the spectrum, which is like resistance. Maybe 5 to 10% is on that renaissance side, which is, and then somewhere kind of everybody falls in between. And then we're seeing basically the same thing on all the functional teams, whether it is marketing, whether it's design, whether it is engineering. All of those are focused on that, and I think we're seeing similar trends, like if I kind of generalize it between the functional teams as well.
Now, a lot of what you do is based around change and change management, and I see that. What it reminds me, I've kind of spoken about this before, is we went through the outsourcing kind of, I don't say boom, but where a lot of procurement teams outsourced procurement, and there was fear about jobs when you go through that. Now, AI just feels like it's outsourcing 2.0. You know, it's like the next generation of outsourcing. It's now, is the bot's going to take my job versus we're going to outsource the job. For those that are, you know, the 20%, the 30% that fear, what are some of the things that they can be thinking about to embrace this? It's not going to slow down. So to embrace it as opposed to fear the change that's coming.
So I think when it comes to thinking about AI, the individual should think about it as AI is an enabler, and we call it's not artificial intelligence, it's augmented intelligence, where we have to think about it that way, where we say there are tasks and work to be done. How are you going to use technology and AI to make it better?
Yeah.
How are you going to make yourself efficient? And then spend your energy on activities that are actually value generating versus some of the busy work that you might be spending a lot of time on. Right? I always kind of spend analysis is one of the examples where that first spend cleansing part, which is a manual effort, used to be a manual effort. That's pretty tedious, and it's not really a value-generating activity.
The hours we've spent searching Google for company names on a spend to build a spend cube.
Yeah. So, and you can spend 1/10 of the time that you used to spend on that, and spend more energy on how are you going to tackle the spend in the most effective way, looking at the trends in the marketplace, what the market is doing, what the future looks like. That's a better value generation activity than trying to recode like a supplier name from X to Y.
Right. So as we think about that augmentation, how do you think that AI is really going to impact procurement? You know, are there certain areas where you think that the use of AI will become the use cases are more obvious and prevalent? Just so people listening, one can have a think about where should I start, but also from a professional perspective, where do I need to be thinking about my career to ensure that I'm not being replaced?
Yeah, but that's a great question. The way I think about procurement is you're in an interesting space, right? So where you are in between internal stakeholder teams and external suppliers. So you are trying to extract the value from this extended value chain and then capture it, right? So that you can deliver it back to the business. When you think about procurement, there is an efficiency play and an effectiveness play. So the efficiency play is where you have tactical activities that can be automated using AI in a most efficient way. That's easy. I mean, that one is kind of the easy part. The effectiveness part is where the big value is. So I'll use example. When you think about when you're building a opportunity assessment for a category, the spend assessment you can use a bot and kind of do a really good job. You are pulling in market intelligence by web crawling, getting all the information, synthesizing it, and then pulling that back into the decision making, so the AI can actually recommend something, and then you are making sense out of that. That's where the value of AI will come in, because it takes a lot longer to kind of synthesize that information.
Yeah, right? So you're having data from, because we talk about differentiated decision making, you know, being, when you tie it all the back to relevance and purpose, you know, procurement showing up and being able to drive different decisions than if procurement wasn't in the room. And so you're able to gather more data to aid the decision making process, but then actually synthesizing it, so it's not based on your ability to run a report or you know, make a connection potentially. But it's not the technology, the AI isn't necessarily saying here is the strategy you should follow, but it's helping inform.
Now, you can design the process to say that AI is going to help you do that, but that's not where it is going, because ultimately, in the whole process, like even if you want to build like autonomous sourcing as a work, right? there is so much qualitative element to that AI can give you optionality.
Yeah.
But the true synthesis of that synthesis needs to be human,
Yeah.
right? So the skill that is needed to do that is really a synthesis of synthesis,
Yeah.
right? So I think when you think about like how you stay relevant, like creative thinking, critical thinking, and then an ability to do synthesis of synthesis, because you can get a bunch of stuff, but can you make sense out of it? And that's what I think the humans are going to be very critical in driving that. Now, can AI replicate some of that over the period of time? I'm sure like it can go up the value chain to kind of deliver some of that work. But I think humans are still always going to be part of front and center on the qualitative aspect of it, because the relationship aspect, the historical context, that's going to be it's not as objective as the AI can just do a web crawling and get that information.
No, and it means that the role of the procurement professional changes to one where you are somebody who is the architect of all these tools and the technology and the intelligence and everything that you have access to through these systems and tools, and kind of translating that. Well, one, taking what the stakeholder, what the business really needs, but then translating kind of the two and interpreting, as opposed to that's something that I think the technology will really struggle with.
And then I think your question, another question was, what could be the use cases within procurement space, right? So what we are seeing specifically on the procurement side, you have two ends of the spectrum of organizations. The organizations that choose like one platform play, where you say, I'm going to go with one platform, anything and everything, with all the pluses and minuses with that platform. And then the other end of the spectrum is I'm going to have hodgepodge of multiple technologies. They don't talk to each other, and you have patchwork, right? And you have somewhere in between. Not a lot of somewhere in between, it's one or the other.
Right.
In the first option, all of these platforms sometimes create suboptimal use cases. So example, you can implement a platform that has CLM, P2P, and strategic sourcing. That platform is never going to be great in all of them.
Yeah, there's very in quality across each module.
Yeah. So, and a lot of times it's a sourcing platform going into CLM, so they don't necessarily have the same robustness around the CLM capabilities, so that you can't do the same.
Yeah, and you select it based on what the most immediate need is.
Immediate need is, so in that case, an AI platform on top of that, one platform can help you solve like the unique use cases in it. And we see that a lot, where you might have a large platform that does a really good job on sourcing side, but not great on the contract extraction side. So we put in like an AI bot to kind of look at all the line level details, pulling the metadata, and being able to translate that into accounts payable, invoicing, invoice level data, match it, come up with recommendations, and then you kind of augmenting that one platform to kind of deliver some of these use cases. The patchwork of it is when they don't talk to each other. That's more common, where you will have a CLM tool that has some metadata, not all of it. You have invoicing system that has a bunch of line item level, and we just recently did it, where you invoice with hundreds of line items, and you have a rate table within the contract with thousands of line items with variations and complexities, like rate discounts, volume discounts, index pricing. The CLM metadata can't really translate that into, are you matching the invoicing against that? And traditionally what the companies did is like, I'll hire an invoice reconciliation company, give them the incentive to find these, audit them, and I'll give you the money against that, right? What we did is we built an AI bot around that, did all of that reconciliation, and that AI kept on learning as you kind of go along. And then the time to actually extract value went down significantly. And it's pretty, kind of, if you think about it, it's a pretty tedious task. Like you're going line by line and trying to find something, right? Versus I think, this is where I think the technology actually is a lot better than human at times, because human is really P times Q, right?
Yes, the attention to detail and the speed around that.
So that's one. And then the third piece, I would say, the ability to scale with AI is significant. Like with humans, it's no matter how analytical you are, the consistency of results depends on a person. Versus with a bot, like once you train something, it just keeps on getting better as long as the data is decent, right? We did this with one of the contracts where a client was divesting the business, and they needed to go through thousands of contracts to look at assignment clauses and termination for convenience. And that problem statement came in, and they said, like, it's going to take us months to kind of, how many people you need to put on there?
You need a whole delivery center to figure that one out.
Go through that. We put a bot in place where we identified, and it learned over the period of time and came up with recommendations. These are the 100 contracts you need to look at because the clause is not clear enough. You might need to negotiate that.
Right.
So the category managers basically spend their energy only on actually actioning it versus trying to find whether we have the right clauses or not, right? So that's where I think also like procurement, I think that augmentation part is kind of pretty interesting when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I'm smiling thinking about some of those projects I've had in the past of mining contracts for contractual language around risk, and you have to go through, it takes you 6 months to figure out which contracts you're even going to start looking at because there's so many. You obviously have a lot of conversations about AI with clients and prospects of ProcureAbility. What are some of the questions that you get to hear most often?
Great question. So, few standard questions. Will AI take my job? That's pretty standard. Next phase of it is, will AI take over the world?
Yeah.
I think that's like another question that comes in. I think the third, if I were to kind of think about the common question that we get is, where do I start? Yeah. I think that's where most of the clients struggle. Is it's like, I have so many problems where I can use AI, but I need to start somewhere. I think that's where that's the third. And then the fourth question that I would think about is, what are others doing? There are a lot of followers that they want to wait. And this is where I think the services firms are better positioned, because for us, efficiency and effectiveness is part of the game. Like if you can't do that, then you're not in the business, right? So you have to trial and error, keep on learning and being able to test it out. But some companies are willing to kind of learn from others. And then there are a lot of people that will say, okay, what are others doing? And I will follow that. And so you see a lot of those types of questions as well.
Yeah, I think because we're maybe conservative, a little conservative as a profession, which goes back to that risk tolerance, but also, you know, when we have the ability to make investments in procurement technology, it has to work, because we don't necessarily get a lot of shots at making it right. So you got to be confident that that investment is going to have the desired benefit, which you can then go back and get more investment for. But if you don't, then it might be a long time before you're able to go back and ask for some more investment. Are there things that you think you should hear, questions that you think should be asked that you don't hear being asked very often?
So I think this is where our approach to AI, it's an org design approach. So we call it basically, there are 4 things that you need to think about. What is the work that you're trying to accomplish? What's the outcome? What are the jobs that need to get done to accomplish that work? What are the tasks underneath that, and what are the skills that are needed to do that, right? Not a lot of organizations ask those questions. So I think taking that intentional org design, it's a system dynamic problem, right? So how do you solve that organizational design problem? Not a lot of organizations ask that question. Not a lot of leaders or orgs ask about, what do I need to do from a skills perspective for future? I think that should be one of the big questions that need to be asked and answered as you as you start investing in it. And I think the third thing is, what should be my short-term, long-term plans for this? I think that's another. So rather than being scared about it, I think like how do I get myself ready for it? Right. I think that should be like the third question.
Like what's the baby steps that I need to take? Coming back to a couple of those other points, how do you think we'll see AI change the operating model, the procurement operating model?
So I think the whole, we talked at the start of it, like the whole tactical to strategic, like separating it out. I think it's going to get more intense on the center-led model, because the center-led model gives you the functional depth to drive some of these conversations on the efficiency and effectiveness. So it will get a lot stronger on the operating model side, which is driven by center-led. The second piece would be anything that is complex relationship based. traditionally we're kind of removed from that efficiency, effectiveness conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's going to go away.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be part of, you have to use some of these technology platforms to be able to drive the best relationship / complexity in that qualitative conversations. Traditionally, the procurement business partners or who drove the supplier relationships or customer relationships, they were removed from this efficiency conversation. Like it was all about, okay, I have $1 billion in spend, I'm going to maximize the return on that. Right? I think that's going to change. I think it will become, you have to rely on that central-led model to get the efficiency. You have to drive the decisions based on the optionality that is driven by this tech-enabled kind of human-centered AI part of it. And I think the third piece is, it used to be technology managed by center of excellence.
Yeah.
Not anymore. I think that's going to change. It's going to be part and parcel of everything what we do.
Interesting. We touched on autonomous sourcing earlier in the conversation. Do you feel that a lot, well, I use the term a lot, that can mean different things to different organizations, but that we're going to end up devolving the responsibility for the act of buying for a lot more back into the business. So as a procurement, as kind of a center-led procurement organization, it's more going to be around, we oversee spend, we don't necessarily manage spend, and we're kind of pickier in terms of where procurement is strategically leading the management of spend, and just having autonomous sourcing kind of tools helping and assisting stakeholders buy perhaps some of the tail spend that they ordinarily would push into procurement.
So I think that's a little bit of the name throws people off.
Yeah.
When we say autonomous sourcing, everything, I'm just going to give the my requirements and it just shows up on the other side. It's not going to be that. I think, and I use as an example, like my first complex project was like a global project where my first initial spend cube was like 135 countries by 135 countries metrics. And trying to make sense out of that data for like 3 months and coming up with recommendations, strategic sourcing strategy, and how you're going to run the reverse auction and the lot strategy, all that stuff, right? With AI, I think that exercise most probably will go from 3 months to like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because all the data is there. I think you want to synthesize it other than, and where the human intervention comes in is really all the historical context, all the future, what outputs you want to drive, the qualitative inputs. You're not going to get that just directly through autonomous sourcing.
What we've tried before, what worked and what didn't work, and why didn't it, and what are the cultural kind of roadblocks and barriers to doing certain things.
All of that is going to need a human. All of that is going to need human intervention to also contextualize it, because AI can give you options, might also recommend, but kind of changing the inputs and outputs is still going to need significant investment on the human side. So going back to your question around, would a buying role change? I think it will, but it will change more from where you input your energy in versus actually what tasks you are doing. And I think that's where the biggest value is. And I do feel the whole human-centered AI is where it is going, is you're going to have human at the core, how you're going to augment the capabilities with technology, and how do you make your work better.
Right.
And that's where it is going as well.
So how does that change talent priorities?
So the talent is, so you need a little bit different skills. So you need to upskill some of these things. So the few skills that are very critical, the first skill is a critical thinking skill. So everything that comes in, you're going to have a lot of data. So when you get that a lot of data, how do you make sense out of it? That problem was always there, but I think we hid behind, it's too much. Now it's like, it's all categorized, like what is your excuse to not make sense out of it, right? So that critical thinking is going to be critical. The second one would be, I call it synthesis of synthesis. So you're going to get synthesized data from AI, but you have to still synthesize it, contextualize it. And, so that is going to be a critical skill. Third piece is, you need to be very comfortable with change. this is an area, procurement in general with AI is going to change a lot in next few years.
Yeah.
So being able to keep up with that change, and when I say change, it's not about skills or upskilling all the time, but it's just having a comfort around it, right?
Being open-minded to things that things are going to be different.
Yeah.
And what I always encourage people is to like embrace it and think about how you can be part of the solution, if you will, of driving that change, as opposed to being part of the problem and resisting that change.
So I think that's like the third skill, and then finally, the curiosity to try out.
Yeah.
Because not every organization is going to have that freedom, but I don't think we can run away from the whole integrated model. So having the skill set and capability to try out and also willingness to fail at times, right? And that's going to be another one that is critical. And we in ProcureAbility, definitely that's something that we kind of push for is try it out. Worst thing could happen that will fail, and that's okay. I think let's keep on learning.
How important do you think digital literacy is? And I ask this question because we talk about digital literacy a lot as being important, but then on the other hand, if AI is embedded into the tools and technology that we use, we don't necessarily need to know how it works as a procurement professional. It's just more, what do we do with the information that we now have access to? So is digital literacy important, do you think, for procurement professionals going forward, or do we kind of estimate the impact of digital literacy?
No, I think that I would divide the digital literacy into two sections. One is the data science portion of it, and then the second piece is the practitioner portion of it. If you want to have a career on the data science side, that digital literacy is very important. If it is a practitioner view, I think it's more around how do you make sense out of that data and continue to go up the value chain. So I think it depends on where the career goes and kind of focus on that.
Well, I know it's about time to wrap up. I've got one last question, which is really for any CPO who's listening today, any tips or advice in terms of what they should be thinking about AI and about some of the conversations we've had, both one from the short-term perspective and then a little bit with a longer horizon?
So I think the short term is look at the use cases in your efficiency effectiveness play, try them out. Don't have to boil the ocean, have a handful of them, start testing it out, get the success stories, and continue to make the progress. I think that's the first piece. Second piece is AI is going to play a key role in tackling supply chain disruptions. I think what we went through in the last 3-4 years, I think we can most probably manage that a lot better with the maturity on the AI side, I think, when it comes to disruptions.
And providing the optionality
around that.
Quickly, because that's such an intensive or labor-intensive process at the time of panic to figure out what your options are when you're in reactive mode.
And I think the third thing that a CPO can continue to focus on is talent. Is how do you invest in human-centered approach to AI so that you can invest in training, upskilling individuals, continue to change the org context around training, and be flexible around it, because I think that's going to change in next few years. So being able to change the priorities like every 12 to 18 months to be able to stay on top of what the trends might look like and what the needs might look like is going to be very critical as well. And when you're doing that, the few things that you could do is either partner with like a training firm, partner with a services firm, or partner with even universities, right, to be able to kind of continue to build that as a pipeline as well.
Well, Darshan, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. What I'm going to do as well is I will include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes in case anyone would like to reach out that's listened, and also a link to ProcureAbility as well in those show notes. It's been a pleasure to chat to you on the podcast, and we'll talk again soon. If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.